imagine two sisters. They're sitting there watching television, but only one of them is actually looking at the screen. The other's just staring at a blank wall.
Right.
And suddenly, the sister, looking at the screen, sees something hilarious. And without a single word being spoken, the sister staring at the blank wall just starts laughing.
It's wild to even think about.
Right, because they share the exact same sensory experience. How is that even biologically possible? And I guess more importantly for us, what can two incredibly unique girls teach us about the rest of the human race?
I mean, it sounds like complete science fiction, but it's a very real, documented psychological case. And honestly, it is the perfect entry point into how scientists actually managed to study the chaotic, messy swamp of human behavior.
And that is exactly our mission today. We are looking at the actual toolkit researchers use to decode the human mind. For this deep dive, we're digging into section 2.2 of chapter 2 from the textbook Psychology 2E. And to really bring this material to life for you, we decided to structure today's conversation a little differently. I am going to be taking on the role of the inquisitive, maybe somewhat skeptical student, trying to make sense of all this.
And I will gladly step into the lecturer role. Consider the metaphorical tweed jacket officially on.
Awesome.
But before we start unpacking the specific tools researchers use, we really need to establish the foundational rule for this entire section of the textbook. What's fascinating here is that every single method we are exploring today shares one massive limitation.
Oh, right.
Yeah, they can only show us correlation. They can prove that a relationship exists between two variables, but they absolutely cannot prove causation.
Okay, so they can't prove cause and effect.
Correct. I mean, to prove that variable A causes variable B, you have to run a highly controlled experiment, which involves, actually manipulating variables.
Right, which we aren't doing.
Exactly. We aren't manipulating anything today. Today is strictly about observation. How do we gather accurate data about human beings without breaking the rules of science?
Yeah.
And that brings us to the first tool in the observational toolkit, which is what you introduced at the top of the show.
The conjoined twins.
Yes, the clinical or case study.
Okay, let's unpack this. A case study focuses intensely on just one person, or maybe like a tiny group of people.
It is an incredibly narrow lens. I mean, you might have a researcher who spends their entire career studying 10 people. Or, in the case of Krista and Tatiana Hogan, just 2.
The twins.
Right. They are conjoined twins connected at the head, but their physiological connection goes deeper than just the skull. There is evidence that their brains are actually connected at the thalamus.
The thalamus. Wait, if I'm remembering my biology correctly. The thalamus is basically the brain's grand central station for incoming sensory information, right?
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
Like, all your sensory inputs, except smell, I think, route through the thalamus before being sent to the higher cortex to be processed into actual experiences.
That is exactly the mechanism at play here. Because their neural pathways intersect at that specific sensory relay center, sensory input from one twin's body can potentially route straight into the other twin's brain.
Wow.
That's why one twin can drink juice, and the other twin can actually feel the physical sensation of drinking it. Or why one laughs at a television show she isn't even watching.
Okay, student pushback right out of the gate here.
Let's hear it.
That is undeniably fascinating. But if the ultimate goal of psychology is to understand and explain human behavior on a broad scale, isn't spending your entire career studying just 2 people completely counterproductive?
How so?
Well, their brain architecture is a biological anomaly. How does understanding their shared thalamus help us understand how, say, the listener's brain works?
It's a fair point. But think about the mechanics of sensory processing. For neuroscientists trying to understand how the brain maps physical sensations into conscious thought, these girls offer a living, breathing window into that process that simply cannot be replicated in a lab.
I guess that's true.
You get an unprecedented depth of data. We're literally learning about the boundaries of consciousness itself. As long as their family agrees, scientists will follow them to see how their distinct personalities develop, despite sharing sensory inputs.
So the data is incredibly rich. You're getting a microscopic view of the mechanics of the mind.
Oh.
But the glaring weakness is that you can't generalize the findings.
Exactly. Generalizability is the key hurdle here. The greatest strength of the case study, its highly specific, intense focus, creates its greatest weakness.
Right.
You cannot apply what you learn from Krista and Tatiana to the larger population. You get profound depth, but almost zero breadth.
Which leaves us with a huge problem.
Yeah.
Because if we can't generalize from rare cases because they're too unique, how do we study normal behavior? Because if you just, like, pull a regular person off the street, sit them in a sterile laboratory and stare at them with a clipboard, they're going to act weird.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like when you're driving down an empty highway. You might be speeding, music blasting, totally relaxed. But the second you check your rearview mirror and see a police cruiser behind you, your driving behavior instantly transforms.
You sit up straight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You put both hands on the wheel, you check your speedometer, you are no longer acting naturally because you know you're being observed.
The police car effect. That is the exact phenomenon psychological researchers have to defeat. And their solution is the second method in our toolkit, which is naturalistic observation.
Right, getting out into the wild.
Exactly. The goal here is ecological validity. You want to capture how people or animals behave in their authentic environments, which means the observer has to be completely invisible.
Section 2.2 has a brilliant example of this with hand washing. Like if you stand in front of a lecture hall and ask people to raise their hand if they wash their hands after using the restroom, every single hand that goes up.
Because of social desirability bias, nobody
Yeah.
wants to publicly admit to poor hygiene.
Right. So self-reporting is useless. To get the actual data, researchers have to go into the restroom. But if a scientist stands next to the sinks in a lab coat taking notes, compliance will magically shoot up to 100%.
They're the police car.
Yes. So the researcher has to blend in. They might stand at a mirror, pretending to adjust their contact lenses for 20 minutes while secretly tracking who actually uses the soap.
I do love the sheer sneakiness of that.
It's so clever.
Yeah.
The textbook also highlights researcher Suzanne Fanger, who is studying peer exclusion among preschool children.
Oh, the playground study.
Yeah, you can't just stand on a playground staring at 4-year-olds without changing their behavior. So Fanger equipped a few of the children with hidden wireless microphones
Which is brilliant.
because the kids completely forgot they were wearing them. And the researchers could sit far away, capturing the raw, unedited social dynamics of preschoolers.
It is a phenomenal workaround for observer bias. And naturalistic observation is not just for humans, it's the bedrock of animal research, too.
Like Jane Goodall.
Exactly. She spent decades observing chimpanzees in Africa. The entire validity of her research hinged on her ability to integrate into their environment without disrupting their natural social hierarchies.
Wait, I remember reading about a controversy with Goodall's methods in the text. She actually gave the chimps names, like David Graybeard, instead of just assigning them clinical numbers.
Yes, she did.
And critics were furious, arguing that naming them introduced emotional attachment, which destroys the pure objectivity required for science.
That debate really gets to the heart of the naturalistic observation dilemma. You have to be close enough to truly understand the nuanced behavior, but detached enough to ensure your own human biases aren't coloring the data.
Is there a middle ground? Like, can researchers set up a scenario, but still observe the natural reactions?
They can, yeah, through structured observation. A famous example mentioned in the text is Mary Ainsworth's strange situation, which evaluates infant attachment styles.
How does that one work?
Researchers place a caregiver and an infant in a room with toys. Then they introduce specific timed phases, like a stranger walks in, the caregiver leaves the room, the caregiver returns.
So the environment is highly orchestrated, but the behavior they're measuring, how the baby cries or explores or reacts when the caregiver comes back, is completely natural.
Exactly. The structure allows researchers to isolate specific behavioral triggers rather than waiting weeks for a baby to experience separation anxiety naturally.
Which actually highlights my biggest issue with naturalistic observation.
Cool.
Time is the ultimate enemy here.
Oh, for sure.
Waiting around for preschoolers to exclude each other, or hiding in a bathroom waiting for people to wash their hands, it takes an immense amount of time and money. It relies on so much luck.
It really does.
So if time is the enemy of observation, how do scientists cheat time to get data from thousands of people at once? Can't we just directly ask people what they do?
We do. And that brings us to our third tool, surveys. When naturalistic observation takes too long, or case studies are too narrow, surveys offer massive scale. You can gather data from huge samples of people incredibly quickly.
And just to clarify the terminology from the textbook for you, a sample is simply a subset of the larger population the researchers are actually trying to understand.
Yes, and because survey samples are often quite large, researchers use measures of central tendency, like the mode, median, and mean to summarize what a typical response looks like.
Okay, but as a student, here's where I completely lose faith in surveys. Think about the last time you filled out a medical questionnaire at the doctor's office. When it asks how many alcoholic beverages you consume a week, do you put the real number? Or do you round down?
People definitely round down.
We lie. We misremember. Or we just tell the researcher what we think they want to hear. If human beings are actively deceiving you, even subconsciously, how is a survey scientifically valid?
The threat of deception is the primary weakness of surveys, no question. You sacrifice the depth of a case study and the realism of naturalistic observation for scale. But researchers have developed mechanisms to bypass that self-reporting bias.
Really? How?
Well, the textbook highlights a fascinating 2012 study by Jenkins and colleagues. They were investigating whether negative, prejudicial attitudes toward the Arab American community still lingered a decade after the September 11 attacks.
I mean, if you ask someone directly, are you prejudiced against this group? Their frontal lobe kicks in immediately. They know the socially acceptable answer is no.
And that is exactly what happened. When Jenkins asked direct questions about overt prejudicial attitudes, the participants overwhelmingly claimed they held zero prejudice. They completely denied it.
Of course they did.
If the survey stopped there, the data would say prejudice was non-existent. But the researchers didn't stop there. They designed a series of indirect questions to bypass the participants' social filters.
How indirect? What does an indirect question look like in this context?
They asked questions assessing the participants' willingness to interact socially with individuals of various ethnicities. For example, how likely are you to introduce yourself to a person of Arab American descent?
Oh, interesting.
Right, they were measuring behavioral intent rather than asking for a self-assessment of character.
Ah, so they changed the angle of approach.
They did, and when researchers analyzed the responses to those indirect questions, a starkly different pattern emerged. The participants who claimed to hold no prejudice whatsoever indicated a significantly lower willingness for social interaction with Arab Americans compared to other ethnic groups.
That is wild. The survey managed to trick their brains into revealing an underlying pattern of prejudice that they were either actively hiding or maybe completely blind to themselves.
It proves that while surveys are vulnerable to deception, clever survey design can circumvent our psychological defenses and extract profound truths at a massive scale.
Okay, let's look at the board so far. Case studies give us immense depth but no scale. Naturalistic observation gives us raw realism, but takes forever. Surveys give us scale, but we have to wrestle with the fact that humans lie.
A pretty messy toolkit.
Is there any way to study human behavior without actually interacting with unpredictable human beings at all?
There is an entire field dedicated to exactly that. It's our fourth method, archival research. This approach relies exclusively on analyzing existing records or historical data sets to identify patterns and relationships.
I read this part of the chapter and thought, this is the introvert's absolute dream method.
It really is.
You don't have to monitor a preschool playground. You don't have to trick people with surveys. You just sit in a quiet room with a massive server of data. It must be incredibly cheap.
The cost effectiveness is a huge advantage. Section 2.2 gives the example of analyzing a decade of college academic records. A researcher could pull data on course loads, grades, and extracurricular involvement to see what factors best predict whether a student will graduate in 4 years.
Just looking at the numbers.
Exactly. You are analyzing thousands of human lives without ever conducting a single interview.
But the textbook points out a massive structural flaw here. You have zero control over the original data collection.
You are entirely at the mercy of the past. Imagine you are trying to harmonize data from a university registrar in 2010 with data from 2020.
Well, that sounds awful.
Right. What if the 2010 administration defined extracurricular activity differently than the 2020 administration? What if a specific form was optional for 5 years and then became mandatory?
Yeah, the data wouldn't match up at all.
The painstaking process of scrubbing and standardizing archival data is a nightmare because you cannot go back in time and tell them to measure variables consistently.
So you basically have to contort your research question to fit the messy clues that happen to exist, rather than designing a clean study to answer your specific question.
Exactly. You are a detective sifting through whatever evidence was left behind. Now, student, I have a final challenge for you.
I'm ready.
All the methods we have covered, case studies, natural observations, surveys, and archives, they're all fantastic for capturing a static snapshot in time. But human beings are dynamic. What if I want to know how you, the listener listening to this audio right now, are going to change over the next 40 years?
Looking at section 2.2, this brings us to the methodology showdown. cross-sectional versus longitudinal research.
Let's explore the mechanics. Cross-sectional research is the shortcut. It compares multiple segments of the population at the exact same moment in time.
Okay, give me an example.
If I want to study how dietary habits change as people age, I don't wait 20 years to watch someone grow old. I go out today and survey a group of 20-year-olds, a group of 40-year-olds, and a group of 60-year-olds, and I compare the data.
It's a brilliant shortcut. But the textbook uses the example of popular support for same-sex marriage to expose a massive flaw in this method.
Yes, it's a great example.
Survey data consistently shows that younger demographics support same-sex marriage at much higher rates than older demographics. But if I see that a 20-year-old supports it and a 70-year-old doesn't, I can't conclude that the biological process of getting older physically changes your brain to become less supportive.
Why not? The data clearly shows a difference between the ages.
Because of the cultural timeline. The 70-year-old grew up in a completely different social, political, and cultural climate than the 20-year-old. The difference in their survey answers might have absolutely nothing to do with age itself and everything to do with the specific generation they belong to.
That is called a cohort effect. Cross-sectional research is highly vulnerable to cohort effects because it conflates age with generational experience. So how do researchers isolate actual age-related changes?
They have to abandon the shortcut. They use longitudinal research.
Correct. In longitudinal research, you take the exact same group of individuals and test them repeatedly over an extended period.
So it's not a snapshot anymore.
Right. You survey a group of 20-year-olds, then you track those exact same individuals down a decade later when they're 30, and again when they are 40. By following a single cohort through time, you completely eliminate the cohort effect.
The scale of these studies is staggering. The textbook mentions the Cancer Prevention Study 3, or CPS 3. It's an initiative sponsored by the American Cancer Society that tracks hundreds of thousands of participants over 20 years to determine predictive risk factors for cancer.
Just massive.
They survey participants on their diet, exercise, and family history, and then just keep checking in every few years to monitor who develops cancer and who doesn't.
The logistics of a study that massive are incredibly complex, but the payoff is world-changing. The text points out that earlier iterations of this exact type of longitudinal study provided the very first scientific demonstrations linking smoking to increased rates of cancer.
Wow.
It fundamentally altered public health.
But the textbook also highlights the brutal realities of longitudinal research. Beyond the massive financial cost of running a 20-year study, researchers have to constantly battle something called attrition.
Ah, yes, attrition.
Over 2 decades, people move and leave no forwarding address. They change their names, they get tired of filling out the surveys and simply drop out. Or, unfortunately, they pass away.
And attrition doesn't just shrink the sample size, it threatens to destroy the validity of the entire study. Think about the mechanics of attrition. The people who drop out of a 20-year health study are often the ones whose health is declining, or whose lives have become too chaotic to fill out paperwork.
Oh, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, if only the healthiest, wealthiest, most stable participants remain after 2 decades, your sample is no longer representative of the general population. The data is hopelessly skewed. Researchers have to actively, constantly recruit and analyze the remaining participants to ensure the sample stays balanced.
Okay, dropping the enthusiastic student persona for a second.
And I am officially taking off the tweed jacket.
When you look at section 2.2 of Chapter 2 from Psychology 2E as a whole, it really is a masterclass in critical consumption of information. Every single method we discussed has a fatal flaw.
They really do.
Case studies lack breadth. Naturalistic observation lacks speed. Surveys are vulnerable to lies. Archival research lacks control. And cross-sectional studies are blinded by cohort effects.
But by understanding those flaws, we can navigate the data more intelligently. And we have to remember the golden rule we established at the beginning. All of these methods yield correlational data, they observe relationships, but none of them manipulate variables, which means none of them can definitively prove cause and effect.
Which changes everything for you, the listener. The next time you are drinking your coffee and you see a bold news headline claiming, "Study proves that X causes Y," you now have the toolkit to interrogate that headline.
Ask the right question.
Exactly. To ask, how did they get this data? Was it a survey where everyone rounded down their bad habits? Was it a cross-sectional study that completely ignored generational differences?
Or was it just a case study of one highly unusual incident that the media is trying to apply to everyone?
Exactly. It empowers you to see the underlying architecture of the claims being made. But digging through this section leaves me with a lingering, somewhat provocative question about where psychology goes from here.
Oh, where's that?
Well, we talked extensively about how observing people naturally changes their behavior, the police car and the rearview mirror effect. And we talked about how people lie on surveys.
Yes, the constant struggle to bypass human deception.
With the explosion of the digital age, do you think the future of psychological research will abandon those messy methods entirely in favor of digital archival research?
That's an interesting thought.
Think about it. Our internet search histories, our smartphone location data, our social media scrolling patterns, those are the only places where we are truly unobserved. It's the only place we are completely honest. Will scientists stop asking us questions and just start analyzing our data trails?
That is a profound shift to consider. But it raises a terrifying counter-question. If we rely entirely on digital footprints, does that introduce a brand new, even more dangerous kind of observer bias where human complexity is reduced purely to what we click?
A completely different kind of distortion. Something for you to mull over the next time you type a question into a search engine. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the human mind.